So today we're going to talk about multi-valued fields in Access. Let's talk a little bit about what they are, when they were first released, which was in Access 2007, so they've been around since then. And the reason that they were released primarily was to be compatible with SharePoint lists. The idea of having multiple values stored in one field was something that lists in SharePoint could do, and of course Access wanted to be able to connect to SharePoint lists and to read those lists and interface with those lists. And that allowed it to do so. Now, people have been using multi-valued fields for other things other than SharePoint lists, and today we're going to talk a little bit about when that's okay and when that is not a good idea. So as an example of why you might want to do this, you might have several employees that work on the same project, and you want to store a list of all their names in one field in the project. If you have, employee 1 and employee 2 working on project 1, and employee 2 and employee 3 working on project 2, and maybe employee 3 only working on project 3, that's something that you could then see and store all in one field. In order to do this, you have to have your database in AccessDB mode. You cannot have it in an MDB mode, so you have to make use of that. Let me move this window over here so I can see comments that people have on the side there. Otherwise, they're hidden by my presentation. So let's look a little bit at a couple of tables and the multi-valued fields, so you can take a look at them. So I have set up a couple of tables here. This one actually happens to be linked to a SharePoint list on my SharePoint site, and so let's just, we can't act the link table, but you can see here that this is the list, and this is the multi-valued column. It comes across as a short text data type, but then if you look at the lookup, here are the choices, and here's the key as to what makes this a multi-valued field. Allowing multiple values, yes or no. So if this was no, which is the default, then you cannot select multiple values for that list. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what they look like here, here's the multi-valued column where you have choice 1 and choice 2 selected for the first person, choice 2 and 3 here, 1 and 3 here, and only 1. And when you look at that in the actual drop-down list, you see what looks like what you might be used to seeing a list box as opposed to a combo box looking like once you expand it, and then little select boxes in order to choose what you've got. And so if you change, for example, and select that, then you've got, all 3 of them selected here. Seem to be having a good drag. There we go. Got a little slow response probably. So that's how that works. Similarly, change the layout. If you've got your own table, you can do the same kind of thing. And in this instance, have the lookup being the choices like we showed in the previous example with the SharePoint list where I've got choices as a value list. But I wanted to also demonstrate to you that it doesn't have to be short text. It doesn't have to be a value list. You can also use something like the assign to, which in this case is connected to an employee table. And I'm sure that you're used to doing something like this where you have both the ID and the name in your select list, and then you bind it to the ID field, which is why we need a number type here, because ID is a number. And then you've got 2 column counts, but you're going to have your column widths be 0 inches and 2 inches. The 0 will indicate that you will not see that employee ID. In all your pop-up lists, you're just going to see the name, even though what's really stored in your data field is the ID. And again, what makes this different than what you might be used to seeing with normal lookups is this allow multiple values is set to yes as opposed to no. So what that looks like from a table point of view, this is very similar to what we saw in the SharePoint list, and then you have the same kind of thing for the numbers. In this case, there happens to only be 2 employees in the table, but you see them represented by commas within the table entry, and then if you click on the combo box, they're displayed more like a combo box drop down. They're displayed more like a list box with select boxes in them. And you can see all of the choices no matter which one you select, and then just the ones that are that you have selected previously as checked. So that's a little bit about that. So what do we got a little bit more behind the scenes here, and what exactly is a multi-valued list? The relationship behind a multi-valued list is what we call many-to-many, which means if you have 2 tables, let's go back to our tables again, and in this case, we saw with the multi-value access list table, there's entries in here for them, and these happen to be different people, and they are assigned to things in an employee. So if you're taking this employee table and you're looking at the multi-value access list, one person can be assigned to 1 or more employees. And this table, the multi-value access list table, has multiple entries. So we have multiple entries that relate to multiple possible entries in the employee table. So that's what you call a many-to-many relationship. So as you might guess, the actual data behind the scenes in Access is not really all stored in the field that's indicated. It's really stored in a hidden table that Access keeps track of, where it's probably got the ID of the table that it's in, and then a list of what it's got in the what it's selected in the multi-value list. Inline, we talked about this, it's displayed as a comma separated list. When you click the combo drop down, it's displayed like a combo box, or to me it actually represents or looks a little bit more like a list box with select boxes beside it. To get to the single value, you actually have to add this dot value at the end. Otherwise, if you're looking at the field name itself, you will see what is displayed here in the comma-separated list. And we're going to go through a few queries to show that. And I think that maybe I have. That's maybe at the end. So I don't want to leave here without discussing limitations, which is one of these slides that I have of multi-valued fields, and why it's not a great idea to go just wild with this and use this all over the place. I really recommend that if you need to, if you're joining with a SharePoint list, or in limited use cases, this actually be used. And I think that talking a little bit more about how you use it in queries and some of the different ways to get at the data is going to help show you what some of the difficulties are with using this. Again, when you're creating a multi-valued field, you do that through the lookup options on the table itself. Come back to that here. So you use the lookup area, and you can use either tables or queries, or you can use value lists, either one. You have the option to bind to text values or to an ID, which is what I showed you with the employee table, which is not necessarily shown. When you are using queries, let's take a look at that. So let's create a query here based on this multi-value access list. And you can see when you create that query that you have multiple choices here. You can choose the multi-valued column itself, or you can choose the value associated with that. And so I'm going to choose a couple things here. And just so you can see what I'm doing here, notice this says multi-valued column. It doesn't say multi-column dot value. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And here you can see your multi-valued column being displayed just like you saw it in the table with commas separating the values. Now let's show the other way, where you have multi-column value, and I'm adding them here just so you can see the differences. Okay, and I clicked on the value or double clicked on the value as opposed to the column itself. It's a little strange because you see these kind of this text box that appears, so then you can go down to the one. If you select the broader box or double click on the broader box, you get the actual field, and if you click into the kind of nested box there, then you get the value associated with it. And in this case, because we've got for person 1, choice 1 and choice 2, you actually see 2 rows for that. You see because you displaying the value here. You see choice 1 on one row and choice 2 on another row. Person 4 only has one row here because there happens to be one choice in either one. In this case, because we have both selected here, we actually get, in the case of this one where we've got multi-value column being assigned, or 2 different multi-value columns here, we actually show 4 rows. One where choice 1 is choice 1 and employee 1 is 1, and the other where it's choice 1 and employee value is 2. And then we got the choice 3 with both of the employees. So, not that you might necessarily want to do this or need to do this, but you need to be aware of how this works and displays out when you select one versus the other or both. If you were to do something like not do those, but just do these, sorry, then you're going to see less rows. You're only going to see the rows that appear for the choices. You still see 2 rows for person 1 and person 2, but in this case you only see 2 rows for person 3. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about how you can use multi-valued fields as select criteria in queries and what types of issues you have with that. So let's look again at our multi-value access list table, and let's say that you want to show in a query only the rows where choice 3 is the value, a value in the multi-value column. So we would expect to see these 2 rows for that. So to do so, you could create a query for the multi-valued access list table. And we saw this earlier, how we have both. You can either select the whole column itself or just the value. So let's show everything in this table, and then let's query just on the value here of criteria, choice, sorry. And there you get both rows, just like you would expect it to be. Now let's take a look at the assign to instead. Remember, this was a field that was tied to a text type field, and it was a value list. So we chose one of the value lists. But let's instead use the assign to value, and the values there. Let's go for employee 1. So we'll expect to see just this row from it. So let's change this to employee 1. We get a data type mismatch in criteria expression. The reason we get that is that this assigned to multi-value list, the lookup for it is actually bound to the ID field, not the text field of the employee name. So remember, here in the employee table, which is the lookup value, we've got the ID and the name. So employee 1 doesn't work as a select criteria because what we're really bound to there in that value is this ID field. So we would have to use, instead of equals employee 1, we would have to use equals the ID. So that does work nicely. We've got only that row. However, there's instances where that's not very user-friendly. If you're doing this from a form, you could probably have the ID behind the choice on the form, and it wouldn't be a big deal. But if you're setting up a parameterized query or something like that, you would want the user to be able to enter something that means something more than an ID field. So to do that, I would recommend that you then join to the employee table, which you can do with multi-valued fields. So you would then not drag over the assigned to, but the value itself to join on the ID field or whatever it's bound to, the field, multi-valued field is bound to. And then you would make your criteria be equal to the employee name from the sister table. And then it would work that way. Voila. So again, it is possible to use multivalued field value as select criteria, but there is a difference. You need to be careful of whether or not what you're wanting to use as a select criteria is the bound field of the lookup or an unbound field of the lookup. So if you have these queries and you group another one here. I'm just going to do the name, and I'm going to do the assign to here. And you group them and sum them. Group by that, and here we're going to do sum. Okay, so this shows you then the number of assignments that you get for each of those. And that's the number of values. Let's go look again at the table so you can see that. It's not right either. Actually, that's the sum, not the, I want to do count, sorry. Okay, so here it shows you the number in here. Okay, so as in we've got one employee. We've only, even though it's employee 2, we only have one employee selected. And then we've got employee 1 and employee 2 in this case, so we have 2 employees selected. So you can do a count of the entire thing. Whoops. Clicking on the wrong thing here. So you can group to, and it, even though the field says assign to and not assign to value, you can do a count and it will accurately portray that. But if you go to and you can also do the same if you're grouping by value, where you can use the totals. But sometimes you can't use that, and you have to use .value. Let's talk about a little bit about that and problems with different queries when we're trying to do that. If you've got a query and you're trying to append this table into another table or something like that, when you try to run that append query, if you use not the value but the field name alone, you will actually get an error message. And the reason is that the append can only put one value into that table. And so you have to either exclude the multi-valued column if you're going to use a table with a multi-valued column in a append query, or you need to, use the .value. And in that case, it will only put in the first value. And then in order to put in the other values, you would have to use update statements. The update queries are different as well. Let's take an example here, and we can talk a little bit about what this is. one here. So I got some extra lovely characters in here. So here we're going to update the multi-value list, and we're going to set the value to choice 3. Where the multi-valued column value equals choice 2 and the person is person 1. Okay, so what is that going to do? We've got our list here, and so it's filtering. It's filtering here on the person name equals person 1, and so it's going to go here and it's going to be selecting this row, and it's also going to be using the multi-valued column and looking for the one that is the value of choice 2. So it's going to be changing that to choice 3 when I run this. So let's take a look at here. What I would expect to see afterwards is that this first row will be choice 1, choice 3 instead of choice 1, choice 2. So you have to, in order to do that, you can't update the entire multi-valued column at once. You have to do it one value at a time. And you actually have to delete one of the values if you want to remove one of the choices. So let's run this here. I think I got the wrong. Get a little bigger. Right. Obviously my quotes didn't come over from my presentation. Slightly different. I have to update one row, and let's take a look at that. Okay, there we go. Choice 1, choice 3 instead of choice 3, choice 2. We do have a question. Access intelligently applies aggregate functions to the value. Some of them. I think that if I recall, some does not necessarily, or some of them do not intelligently compute, but most of them do. So why it can do that and not some others, you know, I don't know. But it's definitely something you need to be aware of. If you don't, you need to check your results, because if you don't get the results that you're looking for in your queries, you might want to substitute value instead of the aggregate. Something to look at and think about. Okay, what else? So how about delete? So if you want to delete a value and not a row, you need to use a query like this. I think I'm going to have to do the same thing here on this. Hopefully, I'm going to take my okay, so in this case, it's not choice 2 anymore, so I better put it back to choice 2 in order to run that. But if I wanted to remove choice 2 from person 1, instead of updating the multi-valued column, I need to instead delete a value from there. So like this. Oops. Multi-value access list. Person name. Why is that looking for a parameter value? Let me see if I can put this into design mode. And this is what it would look like, you know, in design mode. So look, lovely. It contains other fields. So as you're working with them, you'll find that sometimes it can get frustrating. I don't want to delete all these other things. I just want to delete. That'll probably do it. Delete 2 rows. So I only deleted 1 row. I only deleted choice 2, although looks like I actually deleted it from here too. I don't know why this one didn't work. Let's look at this one. Okay, let's go back here and select choice 2. And I'm going to do choice 2 for this one too, just so we can have both of them. See if that works. I think I just don't have my syntax right. I'm sorry. It's always figures, right? Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Maybe. Yeah, put this down as limitations. So right, definitely I find that, and why is this not, there we go. What if I turn this into a select query? I've spent too much time here on it. Okay, I've only got 1 row, so that looks good. Anyway, I'm not going to waste time on it. So if I figure it out afterwards, I will take a look. So if, but notice the syntax, delete the multivalued column dot value from the table name. And that's as opposed to your normal syntax where it would be deleting a whole row. So in that case, you would be deleting from, and then you would usually delete, you know, by a row and say something like, right? And then you deleted the whole row in that case. So obviously there's something weird with that syntax wise, and I'm sure I'll figure it out because I did try this ahead of time. All right, so a couple guidelines, and this is what I was getting at. Don't try to use this feature with long lists. I only recommend using it with short lists. If you have a table of 100 employees and you're trying to do a many-to-many relationship with that, this is not a good way to do it. Or especially if you're going to be selecting, you know, 10 employees. It's not readable. It's a lot of data behind the scenes. You'll end up getting frustrated. Do use it if you're using SharePoint services and connecting with SharePoint lists. Keep in mind that if you're upgrading your database, your Access database to SQL Server or some other type of database other than Access, they don't have multi-valued fields. So they would just convert a multi-valued field to a memo field. So you would see what you see in the table. You would see the comma separated lists, and it would be a memo field, but it would not function the same. You couldn't strip the values out using the same queries. So keep upgrading in mind when you make your choice. And then what would be a better approach if you don't fit the guidelines? I would recommend using an interim table which stores the relationships. So what you end up with is a table, and I'm going to just touch briefly on this. Where you have, okay, if you've got this multi-value access list and you have rows in this, I'm just going to display them both, and you have entries in here, person 2, person 3, person 4, and in this case this is actually the key on there. There's not an ID key. The ID is the person name. But in the interim table, you would then have, let's create a table, and I'm going to put an ID field that's auto number, just because you should always have an ID field for every table. And so you would have the key into the one table, which is the multi-value access list table, and then you would have the key into the other table, which in this case is the employee ID table, and you would store those both into the interim table. I to employee, whatever you want. Oops, I don't need this to be auto number. I need this to be number, because it's going to be a lookup into that. You notice how Access now, and this is a recent feature which I upgrade, which I love. If you go in to save something and you name it, if you've used Access for a while, you know this has been frustrating. If there's some problem, previously it didn't used to save the name and you'd have to type the name again or whatever. Now it saves it and you can change it, but I absolutely love this feature. So anyway, if you were filling this table out, let's go back into one view. For each of these, then you would have something like, in this case, person 2 is assigned to employee 2. So to accomplish the same thing in your multi-to-employee table, you would have the person name, and then you would have the employee ID, and then like one, it has 2, and so you would have 2 rows actually in that table, where you would have row 1, and then you would have something like this. So that there'd be a row for each one. This has got an index in it. Let me do my index, sorry. Yeah. That's not the one I wanted. So I can't have a yes, no duplicates index here. I may or may not want an index on it, but okay, and then another row here for person 3 and employee 2. What? I don't have an index anymore, do I? Okay, steps here. Obviously, I did not save that, or it did not really save. Oh, duplicates are okay. Here, yes, no duplicates. Yes, duplicates, okay. I gotta do both of them. And that's only because I copied those over from the others where they were key fields. If you don't copy them, if you would have just typed them, you wouldn't have this problem. I'm having the problem because I'm doing a demo, right? So this is how you would do it in an actual table that connects them. And then as far as presenting them, instead of presenting them in a form like this, I should have shown how they're shown in a form. This form was created by default from the multi-value access list. And they look very similar to the table, where as they're displayed, there's a comma in between each of the choices. One of the others that has multiples, and if you do a drop down, there's the list like that. But if I were, instead of using a multi-valued column, if I was to use this table, then I would probably use a subform, and I would have the values that are in this table show in the subform, so that you could see in that case that person 3 in the little subform would have, employee 1, and then on the second line, employee 2. Anyway. Yeah, so I guess I inadvertently, I think, Dan, did I answer your question or show about the equivalent checklist use in a form design with interim tables? Or is that what your question was, couple up? In a way, yes. So typically, you know, if you were, and I guess I do have a little bit of time left, so I can go ahead and show you. If you were to bring in another subform, you could go and you could create a blank form or a form based on the multi. Of course, I selected the wrong thing. There we go. I think I just want to do that one. Okay, there we go, where we get access to do all the work for you. So maybe I don't want this to be a regular form. Maybe I want this format here, not of the ID, but of the whole form. Instead of a single form, I want it to be a continuous form. To assign view here. Okay, so we got continuous form. And then within our multi-value access list form, we're going to add a subform. Don't you love how I got these all memorized? There we go. Okay, and you know, in the interest of time, I'm not going to clean this all up, but we're joined here on person name for, you know, our data, but, you know, I would probably, you know, if I were doing this in real life, clear this up and put a different form header and that kind of stuff on here, but save it, and form view. This is not the right I want here. I thought I saved this, and this was in continuous form. Let's try it in data sheet. Okay, so this is a little bit more like what you would see, you know, and probably you wouldn't want to see the employee ID. You'd probably actually want to put a query in here that brought in the employee name, and you would probably actually hide the ID and the person name so that you would see just a list of employee names that, you know, was in the assigned to. But that's how you would do it in a subform, and I think it's a cleaner way than using multi-valued lists, particularly when you have bigger lists or you want to keep in mind upgrading to SQL at some point, or just have a lot of data. You know, obviously if you've got multiple selections across here, you know, this is a wide field in this form example, but if your names are long or whatever, pretty quickly you get to the point where you can't see everything on one field and it's not readable. And in that way you can have more granular control over queries and your results and that type of thing, rather than trying to worry about whether you're dealing with the whole value or the individual values of the lookups. All right, we're getting down towards the end. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So I think that you can unmute yourself or you can type in the conversation. But I also want to point out a couple of things here that are new. First of all, I created an Access Lunchtime group on LinkedIn. So if you use LinkedIn and you want to be a member of this group, just search under groups for it and ask to join, and I'll let you in. And the purpose of that is just to give me a good place to do announcements and that kind of thing in a different format than just on our blog. Also, next month, if we go to our calendar here, we are going to have a reschedule of what we were originally going to have this month, which is a presentation on DSUM, Power Access, XLOOKUP, and different SQL and VBA functions for queries. And that's going to be by a guest speaker, Dan Moorhead. So that should be next month. What else? At some point, whether it's next month or, yeah, it looks like Dan's on. Great. Whether it's next month or whether it's March, I haven't decided yet. Our whole Access user group is going to be moving away from the Skype. And I do notice that I had a comment in here about some of the different links being, like we have multiple links going on. I will try to get that cleaned up in the next month or so. We're going to be moving to Teams instead, and we're going to let Juan Soto try that out in his Access with SQL Server presentation in mid-February. And then if that goes well, then the rest of the groups are going to convert to Teams. So hopefully that will work. And if we don't see that at the end of February with our presentation, I definitely will try that in March. So I've heard a couple people say that Teams doesn't work well for Europe. So if you are watching this from Europe or watching the recording later, from Europe and you've had bad experiences with Teams, maybe let us know. Otherwise, hopefully we'll be able to use that and we'll all be good. Oh, so it's the email that's wrong? Okay. All right, well, I'm glad you found your way in here today, regardless. I don't seem to see any other questions. Thanks, Dan, for posting a link to the group directly. Oh, I guess one more thing. I had a couple more links on one last slide here that might get you started. And I will publish the slide decks to the blog post, but there are two references that will help you out with multi-valued fields. See if I can click on those and show those. This one is a general guide to them, and it's quite lengthy. You know, it's got a lot of different pieces to it here. And then also one which is using multi-value fields and queries. And so this tells you a little bit more about some of these particulars, about using different the value versus the field, etc. And here's where I was trying to get to and just got confused about the bound value. So that there's a section on that if you want to read more about that. Looks like Dan's pasting in the different links directly into the text, so you can copy and paste there. That's multi-value fields and queries. And yeah, the LinkedIn group I just started, okay? So it's for us and it's brand new. There's the other one. And yeah, one question here about Teams. Yes, Microsoft is actually going to be slowly phasing out the Skype for Business and moving to Teams instead. It does everything that Skype for Business did do or does, and then does other things as well. And so it's just kind of like, don't want to have too many tools out there is the idea. So they're really trying to push the migration to Teams as opposed to continuing to use Skype. So that's why we're going to try that and go with the recommendation. And maybe we can do some other things with it that we can't do with Skype. I do know I attended one Microsoft Teams meeting that I was it was for some kind of MVP group. And the nice thing about it was that even after the meeting stopped, I could see some of the conversation that had gone on. And so I could go back to that and, look up what somebody had said or question, or, in this case, for example, these links even after the meeting stops. So something that Skype doesn't do. I'm sure there are more things. Will Teams eliminate the clicking of my mouse noise? Probably not. I'm sorry if that annoys you. If I was on a different type of audio, I could probably minimize that because I just have the audio on my computer itself, so you hear background noise, including the clicking of my mouse. But maybe we can work on that. All right, well, that's it for today. Hope everyone has a great month, and please join us next month for our next Access Lunchtime. Thank you all.